Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our March Tuesdays with. So good to see you all for what I know will be a wonderful occasion as we're together this March Tuesday, the third Tuesday of the month. And as most of you know, all of you probably, our Tuesdays with series is named after a great book, Tuesdays with Morrie, published back in 1997, bestseller that year. And we chose that title because that is a wonderful story about a professor and a student that goes far beyond the college years to recognize that learning is a lifelong experience. And that's what we enjoy here within the Tuesdays with series, topics of local interest primarily. And that indeed is the case today as we have the opportunity to hear Bud Hill and Billy Baldwin share with us today on Francis Benjamin Johnston's Carolina. And the timing of this, we planned this about a year ago, I guess, to get on the calendar without, at least I didn't know, that the book would be published. Just before this time, one prior occasion at the Movable Feast with Linda, and now an opportunity here for us to hear the two authors as well as to hear and learn much about this wonderful photographer, significant individual of the goes for a long period of time, but particularly 1930s. So we're privileged to have with us today Billy Baldwin and Bud Hill, and a little bit of bio, which is probably, again, unnecessary, but just sort of fun. Billy, novelist, poet, nonfiction writer, born in Mcclellanville. Oh, today we have the creme de la creme of Mcclellanville. Or as they say in Mcclellanville, the tartar sauce of tartar sauce.
Well, they won't be putting that on the welcome side.
Or if you have shrimp, cocktail sauce of cocktail sauce. So anyway, we'll stop
Shrimp
that.
gets the top bill.
Billy was born in Mcclellanville, raised in Savannah, went on to live in Bluffton and Somerville where he graduated from high school. Went on to get 2 degrees at Clemson. I almost said USC, that was awful. I'm sorry. At Clemson, a bachelor's degree in history and a master's degree in English. And after graduating from Clemson, returned to Mcclellanville where he's remained, where he has made a living by crabbing, oystering, shrimping, serving as a magistrate, writing screenplays for Hollywood, designing and building houses, and writing. Bud, nice to have you back. Was here, we were just talking a couple years ago and spoke about Mcclellanville and the museum. I'll say a word about that. Born in Mcclellanville, raised in North Charleston, photographer, historian, director emeritus of the Mcclellanville Village Museum. He's been described as South Carolina's most accidental historian and preservationist. I just had time to kill when I retired. This is what Bud said, so he founded the Village Museum, and if you have not been there, you must go. It's an outstanding museum and a lot of fun, and they're doing great work within the community, still Bud active. You'll find him there every day, almost every day.
Yeah.
Or T.J. Graham's, either one, you'll find him. Anyway, and create a new institution that has preserved the area's history and continues to teach many others about the history, which is just a wonderful, wonderful museum. Join me in welcoming Bud and Billy.
Well, Billy gets the job of sitting and listening to me for a while, and then I let him finish up. But this is a pleasure to be here. I've been here on several occasions, and everyone is as good or better than the last because I get to see some good friends and speak to familiar faces, and that's a nice place. I guess I need to start this off by letting you know that before this is over, you're going to know more about me than you ever wanted to know. We're supposed to be here talking about a lady photographer, but I need to tell you why we're here talking about her first. And then I got to give you a disclaimer also. This is the month that we're celebrating America's women. And I stand before you a 77-year-old bachelor. And if anyone knows anybody that I ever dated in this 77 years, you'll know why I'm still single. Because they don't mind telling you why. But when you think about a 77-year-old man coming to talk to you about a woman, you know he's either pompous and insane, and I believe I'm the latter, because I don't know anything really about women. I know that if God created anything better than a woman, he kept it for himself. I have great admiration for him. This old guy started in his 20s after leaving high school. By the way, that was a career too. I went to North Charleston High School and finally made it through. Thank you, Mrs. Everett, for passing me. And got out and decided what I wanted to do was what my uncle did. My Uncle Ray was a printer. And in my summer vacations, I'd go down to Ridgeland and was hired as the cub reporter for the town newspaper, the Jasper County News. And I went around with my pad and my pencil and I wrote down all about the meetings of the Cub Scouts and the Agricultural Society and the PTA and all those things. And I got introduced to newspapers and the printing industry. And so I went on from there and went to work for a printing company in North Charleston and printed the North Charleston Banner, the West Ashley newspaper, all kinds of weekly newspapers. From there, the Charleston Lithographing Company, which was the premier printer in Charleston at that time, printed the color images of all of the great painters of Charleston and all kinds of top-notch printing. And I finally asked for a raise, and he gave me a nickel raise. And I gave it back to him and left. And went on to get a job at the Medical University of South Carolina, downtown Charleston, and I established the Medical University Press there and worked there for several years. Now I'm in my 20s, and because I was working with lithography and developing film of everything that was to be printed, I got a feel for dark rooms and things like that. And I said, you know, I bet you it's really a lot of fun to work with a camera and to develop film and see it come to life. And I never got around to that part of it, but I wanted to. But I did go to a camera shop and bought a used camera, an Olympia or something like that. It wasn't one of the good ones, but it's the one I could afford. And I started going downtown Charleston where I worked in my break time, and I had a lot of break time. I snuck out of that job a lot. And I went to all of the streets that everybody walks down now, all the tourists go down, and they all have their cameras, their little things like this, and their phones and all. But I went with my camera and I started taking pictures, and I got home after the film had been sent off to be processed and printed, and I looked at them, and I hate to be crude, but they sucked. I mean, I was bad. And I said, I gotta get better, and the only way to do that is educate myself. And so I decided what I'd do for my education was go to the Charleston County Library and to look at books that had pictures that other people had done. I didn't have anybody to teach me hands-on, but I had people that had photographed Charleston, and they were great photographers that had come there, particularly during the Depression years. They were photographing Charleston and Georgetown and all kinds of places throughout the South, New Orleans and all. And so I started checking these books out and looking at the photographs, and I was just in awe of their work. And I said, some of these look like my shots, but much better. They know where to stand, they know the light. I got to learn that. And I started flipping through these books, and this one name kept popping up. but there was no book on this woman. Her name was Frances Benjamin Johnston. And sometimes they didn't even give her credit. There was no name under the photo, but I knew it was her because it was in the last book I looked at. But anyway, I started saying, well, I'm going to check a couple of books out that got her pictures in it and other people's. And so I started walking the streets with my camera like everybody does still today. And I found some of the places that she photographed. She photographed all the great homes, all the wonderful churches and all. And so I went and stood in front of St. Michael's. And I went, this is exactly where that woman stood. Exactly. And I moved over one step, so I wasn't copying her shot. It was mine. I owned it. That's what gave me ownership. But I replicated a lot of her shots, and you know what? My photographs got better. And I kept going and I kept going. But she was one of my great teachers. My other person that I admire more than anything in the world is Walker Evans. But one day, Billy and I were out riding around in the country doing what we do, arguing and photographing, and Billy, go over there, shoot that, shoot that. Well, I know he doesn't care about what I shoot unless he's already written a poem. And all he wants me along for is to shoot the shot he had in mind. And I learned that.
That's actually true. Mine isn't true, but that is.
Well, I never actually ever said that I tell the truth. I mean, you don't let the truth get in the way of the story, ever. But we do that. We ramble around and we go out there looking, and we were just riding along, and he brought up the subject of, you know, Evans and other people that I admire. And I said, have you ever heard of a woman named Frances Benjamin Johnston? And he says, yeah, and we went on and on about her. And this was 10 years ago, Billy?
12 years.
Yeah, okay, that was 10. And we said, you know, somebody ought to write a book about her. Everybody's got a book. And she doesn't. She's mixed in with everybody else, and the poor woman didn't get credit for half of what she did. And she did a lot for Charleston. And so time has passed. And a little while back, Billy said, it's time, bud, let's do it. Now, we're both 77, and time means a lot to us now. There's a lot more behind us than in front. I don't want to live to be 140, well, whatever it is. But anyway, we decided we were going to do a book about this wonderful woman. And we worked on it, and we worked on it, and reworked it, and argued over it, and everything. And today, we do have a book honoring her. And we're very proud of that, the fact that we, two old men, are giving this woman credit in this time when other people ignored her or snubbed her or just didn't give her her due. And Charleston has been very fortunate over the years, and particularly in those lean years of the Depression. All the great photographers came. They were sent by the government, and she was too. And so all of the big, wonderful cities of the South have been documented by them. And a couple of local writers have been pulling all of these photos together and cranking out Charleston books for years, and making pretty good money off of it. So we decided, why not us? Would you know what to do with any money, Billy? Could you get used to it?
Not at this stage.
No. Well, actually, we don't do this for money. We do it because we like doing what we do. We like taking pictures but this one is a special book for us. This woman, I bet you everybody in this room knows at least one photograph that she took. You've seen it time and time again in commercials on television. Ladies, do you remember when Virginia Slim cigarettes came out, aimed at you to give you cancer? I mean, it's the truth. Well, that cigarette came out with one market in mind, America's women. And it worked. And the image that they used in all of their print media and even on television was one that's called The New Woman by Frances Benjamin Johnston. Now, you've seen it. At our last talk, our friend Linda Ketron actually sat on a bar stool in the corner and posed just like the woman in the photo did.
I'm not doing that.
You don't have the legs or anything. But this woman sat before, she set up her camera and put a timer on it, and she sat in front of a gigantic fireplace. And I mean a big old fireplace, like giant old hotels down in Charleston have got. And she sat there and she had a cigarette in this hand. And she had a tankard of some kind of beverage down here. I think it might have been beer. I'm not sure. Or worse. And then she had a little bit of leg showing. And this was what was used to advertise that cigarette. And what that title of that photograph means is, our time has come. You got to deal with women today. And I think she got that point across. You see the independent nature of this woman coming through in that photograph. And you can't deny her time has come. But that photograph was taken long before Virginia Slims. And this woman had put her head down in a man's world and bulldozed her way to the top. A lot of women have done it since, but she was breaking ground in her day. And she was born in 1864 in West Virginia. Maybe the only good thing that ever came from West Virginia. I don't know. Coal came out of there. But she was born there, and her family moved when she was young to Washington, D.C. Her daddy, Anderson, was the head bookkeeper for your government, keeping the books. We could use him now. But Mama was Frances Benjamin Johnston. And that's how the little girl got her name. She was not given a boy's name, Benjamin. She was given her mother's name. And I think it's one that kind of sticks. My name is Selden Baker Hill. That's a hard one to deal with, explaining all those unusual names. But she had a kind of unusual one. And her mother was a role model for this little girl. Her mom, too, was in the news business, the periodical business, and she was one of the very first women to write articles in some of the great national magazines. Her subject was politics. And folks, back when only the writers were men, that was rare. Very rare. And to be accepted in that subject and amongst the people she interviewed, it helped that her husband had a position in the government and that they were fairly well off. our subject today was not some person that came out of West Virginia as a poor person. She never would have ever been recognized in Washington, D.C. if her daddy hadn't had a nice position and a good income. But she did eventually break ground. She went off to school and studied in Paris. She came back, and I'll let you, Billy will tell you more about what she did. But she came back and decided that she would follow in her mother's footsteps, and she was starting to work for periodicals herself. And she was looking at these magazines being published, and she said, this is a place where photography can fit in. Magazines had etchings in them and all kind of illustrations in there, and images, but photos weren't in them in great quantities at that time. And she thought it was a place where it would be welcome. And so she started to say, I'm gonna go and buy photographs. She probably went downtown Charleston and got an old used Olympia or something, I don't know. But I don't know what her first one was in the big time, but the very first camera she had was given to her by this man named Eastman. Oh. Eastman and Mr. Andrew, his first name. Andrew and George were great friends. And he gave this girl a camera and set her out into the world to be a great photographer. He also gave her a job teaching people how to use a camera. Now that's hard to believe. I mean, everybody, the minute you're born, you can use a camera now. But back then, it was a big old box. It had to be lugged around. And she taught people how to use it. And I think that's amazing too, that he had confidence in her to demonstrate his new product. But he went on and did pretty good for himself. And he suggested to her that she find someone to instruct her. Now, she didn't go to the county library and start looking up people like I did. She could actually go because of her contacts and get some real proper instruction. So she went and got the head of the photography department at the Smithsonian to give her instructions. That ain't bad, folks. I'd love to have had that myself. And so she got some really fine instructions when she first began. And then she struck out and started taking pictures. Well, here comes the Great Depression. And lots of people are out of work, including photographers. And your government did one of the only good things that's ever done in the history of the United States. There's been a few. But this was. They took some of these out-of-work photographers and sent them out all over the place to photograph and document agriculture and its work, and people that work in steel mills and coal mines and in the cities. And they sent Francis Benjamin Johnston into a coal mine. Now, if that ain't a man's world, think about it. They pretty tight, those guys. And here's this girl amongst them. But they also send her to Charleston, Georgetown, and Camden. Other people, great photographers, went to other cities like New Orleans and all throughout the South, Nashville. And they took pictures and documented what we have. And many of those photographs are the photograph of a certain house. Every time you see the Roper House or one of the great churches in Charleston, it's one of her photographs. We take them for granted today that when you open up a book about Charleston, there's somebody that'll take a new photo, but they always plug in the old one in there to show what it looked like 100 years ago. Now, This woman was born 80 years before I was born, and I'm still looking at her photographs today, and total amazement. I hope that y'all will go home and Google her, and I hope some of you will actually take one of my books, my Billy books home with you, and leaf through it. And then I hope, my real hope is that you'll pull it down off the shelf every year or so and just leaf through it with your morning cup of coffee and get a little tour of Charleston and Georgetown through her eyes. She had a wonderful eye of framing things, and I don't mind telling you that I still copy her today. When I go to take a picture of a window, a gate, a steeple, the details of architecture, they are as important as the whole image. And she could do it as good as anybody that has ever been. And I try to replicate her. And I even steal from Paige every now and then.
You still got my camera?
I think possession is 9/10. And you will never see it again. Well, that's about all I got to say about this great lady. And I hope that y'all get the sense of how much she has meant to me and how proud I am that this is her book, not mine and Billy's. This is her book. And I think this is one of the best things that Billy and I have ever teamed up to do, is to pay tribute to this woman when others have passed over all these years. Now I'm going to give you William P. Baldwin, the great Mcclellanville writer.
I can hardly hear anything.
If we are the only thing that Mcclellanville is known for in shrimp,
Can't do anything about that.
we got to do something. We got to meet with the mayor and the council. We got to get something better going.
When I was a young man, 22 years old, I graduated from Clemson English Masters with, I wrote my master's thesis on the Dadas and
I can tell they're
Surrealists,
talking because
for
it's
the
really
anti-French art movement. And I came, my father paid for it, and I came home the day I graduated from, he said, well, son, what were you studying? I said, the Dadas and Surrealists. He said, who are they? He said, well, Dad, they would go into French churches and write shit on God on the walls. Oh, come on, Bill, what were you really studying? So that prepared me. When I got to McClellanville, I got a $6 an hour job as the assistant jackleg marine carpenter to a tugboat captain with a 3rd grade education. Because that's all a Dada and Surrealist degree was, that's all it was worth. And my first day on the job, a little homemade railway my uncle had built. The first day on the job, one of the grown men, if you see Captain Joe starting to get angry, just run. Don't look back, don't try to talk, just run. 2 hours later, a second one came by and said, if you see Captain Joe starting to get angry now, just run. He never, I worked with him for years, he never got angry. That was McClellanville, and I stayed drunk for, like most great writers, I stayed drunk for 12 years. And, finally
So
sobered.
did I.
Oh yeah, like sobered up, and
I'm trying to.
my mother had signed a contract to write the text for a plantation to the Low Country, but she couldn't write, and so I said, I wanted to be a writer, I wanted to be a novelist. I said, and they said, you can write, and I said, yeah, I'll write it. And that gave me, what did they give? They gave me 6 weeks to write, look at the plantations and write the entire book. So I went down to the library, not the Library Society, the South Carolina Historical Society, and Sam Stoney, he was the godfather of Charleston history. And I went to his papers, and I started with things he'd written in high school. I did it all in a day. I just read every word that he'd ever written. And that gave me a persona that, and I wrote books with his voice. And I stayed on with Jane Isley, who was a modern day Frances Benjamin Johnston. She's probably South Carolina. She lives in North Carolina, but she's South Carolina's best known woman photographer. She would come here, and she spent a lot of time in Charleston. And she formed her own company, Legacy, which is actually part of Pace Communications, which is a $1 trillion, world global publishing. But Jane was Legacy, and I think I did 6 or 7 books with her, still using Sam Stoney's persona for that work. And there were times when if you went into a Charleston bookstore, tourist, Jane and I had written half of what you were looking at. She kept our names. Our names were the same size, but they were tiny. So I knew about Frances Benjamin Johnston, just like Bud. And Stoney was a little bit of a chauvinist. If you look at this book, Frances Benjamin Johnston put 70 giant photographs in it. And she did another book with her on Charleston, the same thing. Well, you don't see her name here, it's just Sam Stoney. And you flip it open, and here's Sam Stoney, here's his brother-in-law, and here's his buddy. That's it. You want to know who Frances Benjamin Johnston is, you got to go over here. In this paragraph on how the funds were got for the book, there's little need to comment on the contribution of the photography of Miss Frances Benjamin Johnston with her flair for getting the best out of a dwelling. That's her, that's her label in the book. And you go to the beginning of her photographs, and by Frances Benjamin Johnston in 1938. He hyphenates Johnson, Johston. So there was a sort of element of that women didn't really count in her life, and I think as a little joke, she photographed Sam Stoney in here hitting on a Charleston bell. I think that was her revenge. So I became, after I went, that was 1984, I began to work for Jane. And people would say, well, what's your contribution to these photographs? And I'd say, well, if it was before lunch, I'd be standing here saying, when's lunch? And if it was after lunch, I'd be standing here saying, when's supper? And that was true. So I did get interested in that 30s era of photography, the same way Bud did, because it was a golden age. And they sent, into the South, they sent professional super photographers. The FSA, the Agriculture Department, sent the ones like Dorothea Lang and Walker Evans. And the Habs was the other one, the Historic American Building Survey. And they sent some amazing photographers and photographs. But actually, Frances was with Carnegie, and she was the only photographer with Carnegie in the South, which is a good in a way. Georgetown, she set out to photograph everything, and that's why you have, especially Georgetown, you have the poor community, parts of the community, and the cabins of the blacks. She set out to do that on purpose. Nobody else in architecture was doing that. I went, this was pre-electronic days, probably in '87, I rode the train to Washington DC, and I went to the Library of Congress and just stood at the cabinets and just looked through like that at every one of South Carolina. And in the South, it took me till Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday at 4 o'clock, I finished. And I walked up to the desk of the Library of Congress photo, and I said, thank you, I enjoyed that. And she said, we've never seen anybody do that before. Well, in this same trip, I was sitting at a desk and I saw a picture of Old Lang Syne burning down. That was Julia, what was it?
Peterkin?
Yeah, Peter. It was her house burning down, and there was a fire extinguisher in the foreground. And I said, who took this? And the woman said, Francis Benjamin Johnston. And I said, can I see those? And she said, no, you have to be a scholar to see things like that. Of course, that's just like waving a red flag. And so from then on, I made it a point to try to see her things. And then it turned out that the woman had made a mistake. It wasn't even her photo. But by then, so then finally along comes this, everything is scanned. And starting around 2004, you don't have to ride a train to Washington, D.C. You just punch a button. In fact, the second time I went up there, I went into the library and started looking at the photos, and they said, you could be doing this at home, you know. I didn't know. I'm so dense about things like that. So Bud and I started, I think 2009 or 10. We gathered up from electronically, we gathered up these photos that you see in this book, and we have the text I just cut and pasted, but it was a damn beautiful project, but who's going to publish it? And we just gave up, literally, and without telling me a year ago,
That's me.
Yeah, 2 years ago, he printed what we had electronically and carried it or mailed it to Linda Ketchum. And she was our angel. She said, yeah, I'll do this. So the manuscript actually sat there for 10 years, done. Well, I hadn't typed it. The text is borrowed. And I'm proud of the text. It's from the WPA guide, and the text was written at the same time photos were taken. So you get a kind of an odd blend that you wouldn't get in a normal historical look at photographs. And I'll just end by speaking a few minutes on the text because it gave me pleasure. I knew South Carolina had changed. I was working with Sister Peterkin on Heaven is a Beautiful Place, and I would interview her once a morning, once a week in the morning for like 6 months. But after the interview, we would go sit in a restaurant, and that's when you really hear the stories. But one time we went to the restaurant, and then we came over to the Georgetown bookstore at the time. We each wanted to buy Walter Edgar's History of South Carolina. And we got in there 45 minutes after it started, and they had sold out. And I thought, my God. George Rogers' History of Georgetown County, it took 10 years to sell out. And this man had written a South Carolina history that was already gone. And so, anyway, Edgar's also edited the reprint of the South Carolina WPA Guide to the Palmetto State. And in it he wrote, "A product of its times, parts of it may be dated to some jaded modern eyes, some phrases may be jarring to the post-1954 generation. However, the original South Carolina WPA Guide to the Palmetto State was what it covered claimed it to be. It accurately described the state as it was, not as romantics wanted it to be." And it made an odd juxtapositioning. If you took these photographs, especially the plantation photographs, that today at Hampton, they've sent out a directive that Hampton Plantation can no longer be used for celebrations. No more weddings, no more graduation ceremonies, that plantations are a part of slavery and darkness. And it's curious that the same year this directive's coming out, how do we look in the face of slavery? How do we look at what's in this book? And that was a question that the WPA writers, who were from New York and Washington, D.C., they were doing everything they could to boost the state, and yet at the same time it puzzled them that to come here as outsiders, and that they, in this text it's used in here, that the slave owners wanted their slaves to be Christians, and so they would set aside some of the seats in their church for the slaves, but they would set aside 20 seats and they had 1,000 slaves. And that was the question that the writers of the WPA came back to again and again. And when they got, so I edited the insides to take advantage of that. You get to south of Charleston. South of Charleston, the road moves inland, passing over marshes and through shadowy tunnels of moss-curtained live oaks. Later it runs between tall pines and crosses tangled swamps where on a still night can be heard a hound baying on the trail of a coon or possum and the plaintive call of the whippoorwill. Well, if you drive down the Garden Road today, you won't hear any of that, see any of that. It is encouraging to think now that the early Carolina garden makers have achieved a poetic kind of immortality they did not seek. They terraced and planted and arranged vistas for their own pleasure. Possibly they thought no noble thought as they did these things, and probably they had no far projected purpose. But their gardens survived, and the influence of these gardens spread, though the political philosophy the early Carolinians developed has been discarded, the social system on which they depended has been destroyed, and the war they fought has been lost. All the barbaric splendor of slavery times is gone, but the civilized and civilized gardens built in slavery times remain. It was gardens especially. There was a 20-year period in her life when she actually made a living as a garden photographer. And she toured with painted garden slides to promote her work then. And so when she got she wrote here on, see if I can find it. What is said that the first landscape garden in America was designed in 1740 at Middleton Place. The brick Tudor house built in 1738 was enlarged in 1755, etc., etc. The chief charm of Middleton Place is the 18th century elegance and dignity of the landscaping. For the 10 years, 100 slaves labored to complete the 45-acre garden and 16-acre lawn. So the question was, is it fair for us to appreciate the beauty of something that took 100 slaves 10 years to build. And it's just a way of approaching this material in a kind of a modern context. And I'll read the last, Fenwick Hall. Fenwick Hall has been through a lot of different phases, and it was a ruins, and this same Stoney's brother-in-law was the leading architect in Charleston at the time, and he did a facelift on Fenwick Hall that was out of this world, which you'll see in this book. It was an alcoholic treatment center when Jane and Isley and I photographed it, and it's back to being a home now. Fenwick Hall was built in 1730 by the 7th John Fenwick, reputed to be a retired Red Sea pirate. Ghosts in the house are said to be those of a handsome English groom and the daughter of the house who eloped, but were brought back, and the girl imprisoned in a room overlooking the courtyard where her lover was hanged. Cactus, some of the rare night-blooming variety, grow about 20 feet high in the garden here. And then, in case there's any question about it, there's the garden. Here's a big portrait of the cactus. I hope that whets your appetite. Thank you. Oh, it's a privilege. This is the man that made me a poet. I was teasing him about telling the truth. I was teasing him about taking poetic license, but I had written maybe 3 poems in my life, and he had taken all these photographs in the unpainted South, and he would show them to us at lunch. He'd get up at date dark and go and bring them. And finally I said, "Bud, I could write you some poems or country music to go with that." And that was my beginning as a poet, and I've been writing a poem every morning for 12 years.
I wish you would not make me responsible for that.
The other thing, when we were riding down here, we started laughing because Bud has a following in England. And they sent, he was talking about standing where Francis Benjamin Johnston stood, but they sent a photographer over here and met with him, and he went and stood where Bud stood trying to photograph the cover of the Unpainted South, which of course got torn down. So Bud has an international following.
Wow.
And if you go to the post office, there's a lot of my pictures in there.
Thank you. Any questions?
What questions do you have for Bud and Billy?
Were you able to contact her people at all with this book?
No, ma'am, we haven't attempted to do that. We're kind of shy. I'll let him do that. He's better.
Well, she was,
How do you say it?
she was a lesbian, and of course, in all of the things she said, she had a bohemian lifestyle. That's the code word all through here.
So she has no offspring, and mom and dad's gone, and she's gone, and so we don't know who to talk to
Well,
about it.
and actually, she was one of 4 children, and 3 of them died in infancy. We were talking about that before, that with that kind of mortality rate, that life had a meaning. You know, if you survived, you were going to produce something for your.
If you were a family that lost that many children, I mean, it had a great effect. And one of the effects was the child that remained became even more special. And this couple nurtured this girl and made her rise to greatness. And they inspired her, they led her, and they led the way for her in many cases. Her mother in particular led the way for her. And so, I don't know, there might be some cousins somewhere, you know, distant cousins from the mother and father side of the family that we could talk to, but there's no siblings that we could talk to, I'm afraid. But she talks to us.
Yeah.
Every time I look at one of her photographs, it tells me what she was thinking, why she was standing where she was, and looking at what she does. We put this book together, and a well-meaning photographer says, we need to spruce those up a little bit. And I say, would you spruce up the Mona Lisa? A little spray paint on her or something? No. I'm looking at Phil back there, and another photographer sitting right here. Would you let somebody spruce up your work? I would feel like I was desecrating this woman's work instead of making it more acceptable
This one went there
in
too.
today's times. She had a camera of her period that had an ability for that time, and she got the best from that. And I think when you look at this book, you'll say, girl did pretty darn good. And I still think I'm pretty darn good, but she's way better than Bud.
Well, you don't know yet, because Bud and I have we have another book coming out with Linda this summer. And in it, it's got Bud's photograph of Phil, and I wrote a poem about his face.
Oh.
And it's right beside it.
And the only thing that photograph's gonna do is make him famous, not me. Everybody will know his face all over the country.
He said, he's in the book, Bud labels the photos, and what you, for Phil's photo, he spent his life trying to save alligators.
Yeah.
What's the book going to be?
It's called, what is it called now?
Can't remember the title.
Carolina Country.
Oh, Lord, that's bad when the man can't remember the title. It's Carolina Country, because I spent a lot of time in the country.
It's a good book. Y'all have to have a
Photographing everything on the back roads of South Carolina. I don't do a lot of downtown work, some in the smaller downtowns. Sadly, I go to a lot of downtowns that the buildings are there, but there ain't nothing downtown no more. Even the buildings are gutted and empty, and the streets are, there's one in there in a lower part of the state, and I won't mention the name because I don't want them to feel bad. But there ain't nothing in the whole town on a Sunday. There wasn't a car on the street. There was me. And I felt like there was this, when I was walking down the street trying to get my shot at the end of everything, it was echoing. And it was just an absence of everything. It was a dead town. There's a little town called Maysville. Only the front of those buildings survive. But to me, it's magical when I take pictures of these old places and the back of barns and country stores that don't. Every town had several country stores in most cases, at least one. And country stores are gone. Very few survive. There's a couple of them. There's one up in Salters. It's one of my favorite places. I'll ride 100 miles out of my way to go through Salters to get to Columbia or anywhere, because Cooper Country Store is there and they got the best barbecue in the world, and I can spend an hour just walking around in the tool section, because y'all, they got tools that people don't even use anymore for sale. I mean,
We have to go back to Salters. We just went there, just to sign that tract.
I know where you
did
were.
you go to Cooper Country Store? Oh, you missed a treat.
We're going back. It's on the way to.
It's right there at the big intersection there,
Yeah.
right next to the Dollar General.
Yeah.
Dollar General, and that's going to them, and you know what? It hasn't affected them one bit. They've got their sons in the business now. They've opened up a lumber business like they used to have. So those kids are putting new energy into the building, and mom and dad are just sitting up there. She's selling pound cake and he's selling peanuts. And the boys are doing all the work, so life is good for them.
We were there on Sunday, probably.
Yeah, we were there.
You owe it to yourself to go in there and just walk around in there. It's an incredible operation. And there are things hanging on their walls for sale that I know been there for 50 years. But there's all stuff that does sell too. Any other questions?
You mentioned it in the introduction that she took some remarkable photographs of African-American educational establishments. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
He can.
Well, she went down to Tuskegee, which was unheard of in the day, you know, and photographed there. And all the leading black figures, politicians, artists, she photographed them. Actually go online and see the photographs.
She, doors opened to her, and I think it was was open to her because she was a woman, somebody different coming through the door. And I think she was, not ever have met her, but what I've read about her and what I see of her images and pictures of her, I think she was a pretty strong woman, and I wouldn't close a door to her because I know she would push it open. And when she was sent out to Tuskegee and places like that, and to photograph the great black men and women of that time, I think they were honored to have her come through that door to take their picture, and because she did a beautiful job on them. And she captured those people in images that you and I look at every time they talk about one of those folks. And great actors and politicians and all, she had access to them that a lot of men didn't. And I think it was because she was a woman. Women have a way of using their womanish traits when they have to, but I don't think she pushed that. She was what she was, and in great demand because of the quality of photographs that she made. This more than anything.
The new book that we're going to come back and promote the middle of the summer.
We haven't been invited yet.
It's Buzz photographs.
Try not to be
It's
presumptuous.
Buzz photographs of what he says that driving around, and but I used it as to reflect on Christianity from beginning to end. And you come to the end, and I don't know if y'all know out on Marysville Road, there's
Just wish I could have heard
a
it.
beautiful cemetery. We have some large statues.
My luck, as usual.
And one of them is God. One of them is God with a big forked beard. And so at the end of this 170-page book,
Bummer day for me.
I say, I've looked at 1,000 of Bud's photos, and this is
I'll
as
leave
close
as
as
quick
I
as I
can
can.
come to God.
As soon as they give me a
It's this
chance.
giant
I'll get out.
statue of the thing. And then I put, unless, maybe, and it's this photo of this statue of this woman with a very concerned, loving look on her face. And God's out on Pennyroyal Road, but Bud identified each photo in the text. And he typed in Denmark, South Carolina. So God is a woman who can be found in Denmark.
And that's about all that's there. Well, I don't know whether God's a woman or a man, but, you know, when you visit these old cemeteries and you look at the beautiful artwork that's in those stones, the flowers that are carved in them, the images of men and women's faces and birds and anchors and all of these things. I photograph a lot of that, and we use them in our books. Art takes many, many shapes. And a good carver of stone makes some pretty fragile things out of something that breaks pretty easy. And when I see a wreath done and hanging from the statue of a lady's arm, I'm amazed by that. And I've got to take that picture. And he loves that. Now, Billy is much more religious than I am. Everybody in the room is. But I do believe. I do believe. And he brings it up, you know why I use that picture? And then he goes into his feelings of God's specificities in this world. And I said, well, that's a perfect fit. But I didn't know why I took the picture. I just saw something that moved me and inspired me to take a shot. And he interprets it all for me.
Yeah, I guess we are a pretty good team.
No, I don't think so. You're kind of pushy.
How long did Frances live? How old was she when she died?
She was born the last year of the Civil War, 1864. I think she lived up to 1960, I think, maybe her late 50s.
She saw a lot in her day. She recorded a lot in her day. Y'all got a wonderful library here. I've talked about the downtown library, but the downtown library here is good. And there's a little room in the corner over there that I spent hundreds and hundreds of hours in, that research room. And y'all, a lot of my time was led by his mother, the greatest genealogist that ever lived, and one of South Carolina's greatest historians. People came and sat at her knee and listened to her tell the stories of South Carolina. She was the greatest property researcher that ever been in South Carolina's history. I am the second best because of her. But I would come up there to research all of the names associated with Mcclellanville and St. James Santee Parish. And I still to this day can go in there and see books I didn't know were there. I just go from shelf to see what's new. But I don't know how many years I would go in there and get them to unlock that door for me, and I'd just stay in it all day long. And I would burn up that copier. And y'all, them dimes I was putting in it at that time, a little more than a dime now, came out of my pocket. There wasn't no village museum back then. I was putting out Bud's money. But I was as happy as a lark in that room because it's a treasure. You need to go check it out if you've never been in that room. And I'll bet you if you have ties to this area, your family's in there. There's a book written about them. It might be spiral bound or some little thin book, but they got it, and it's a great treasure. Charleston's got a lot of that too, and they're wonderful librarian and the Historical Society, but right in your own backyard, you got your history. And if you don't have it, come see me, I'll tell you where to go. Not literally.
Billy, but thank you very much.
Very well.
As I said, what a treat, and how interesting. Again, the book is available back there, and I'll add, so very kindly, it's $30, and they're giving half to the Friends of the Library and half. So great opportunity not only to get the book, but also contribute and support the book.
Well, just remember, I can furnish you a list of my creditors. They're all standing in line with their hands up. Help me out of debt.
As I said, this is a part of this is our 5th series of lectures in Tuesdays With, and we have 2 more lectures remaining this year in our September to Maine series on the 3rd Tuesday of April 19th at 10 o'clock, Bees and Beekeeping in the Low Country.
Oh.
And interesting topic in regards just to the whole culture of flowers and so forth and what's happening. That's with Ben Powell, entomologist at Clemson University, going to be here to speak. And then our final of the year will be on May 17th. The Grimke Sisters, South Carolina Women Who Work Toward Abolition. Lee Brockington is going to be doing that presentation in May. So I hope you'll join us, and keep that in mind. There is on the back table a list of spring events, which with the friends that you can pick up and get those things on your calendar. I want to mention a few other things, if I may, beside this lecture series. This Saturday is our first ever spring community yard sale. We've been doing this regularly in the fall and had such a great response in the fall, and also got interrupted by rain about halfway through. So we decided to do a spring community yard sale. We already have 15 families who have signed up, so it'll be a good number back here in the parking lot of the courthouse. And a lot of good things for sale. There's also going to be some people selling cakes and cookies, and we'll also have a book table from the Friends of the Library, and also somebody contributed some jewelry to us. And so we're going to have a table of relatively inexpensive jewelry that will be out there for sale on that occasion. That's from 8 till noon this Saturday. And if you're interested in having a table, we're taking care of the advertising. If you come down Church Street, it's there. We've done all the social media advertising. You don't have to do it at your house. It's still not too late. I think it's $15 for one parking space, $20 for 2 parking spaces, and it's a great way to get rid of stuff that you found during COVID you want to get rid of. So it's not too late to do that if you'd like to join us. Next Wednesday, a week from tomorrow, we're going to be having a special event, another book occasion. The Georgetown Gators of Winyall High School. Danny Bratton, class of 1952. And I think you guys were involved in this project as well, a history of the football team. And it's just really interesting. Again, one of these, the passion, the interest, the topic is going to be really good. Danny's going to be with us, and we're going to have a presentation by Danny, a brief one on that, and then also sort of a celebration and a reception and a book signing. So if you're interested in joining us, that's going to be next Wednesday, the 23rd at 2 o'clock. And then finally, I have 2 other things. Sorry. Friday, April 8th, we're going to be having a living history performance by Deborah Connor entitled Edith Russell, Titanic Survivor. And she'll be here, and that's going to be at 2:30 in the afternoon on Friday, April 8th. Again, that's all listed back there on our spring activities. Dan, you want to say something about the DigiBridge series?
Yeah, we're having a DigiBridge series. It's grant funded by South Carolina Humanities, but it's we will have 12 presentations total, 11 left. We had one last Wednesday, so tomorrow at 2 o'clock. They're all on Wednesdays at 2 p.m. But there are presentations about local history of Georgetown County, local history and culture and that sort of thing. Wednesdays at 2 o'clock every week, and it's throughout March, April, and May. They are not at this branch, not at the Georgetown Library branch, and they're not at Georgetown, but they are at our other branches, the other 3 branches. In March, they're at Southern Georgetown, out on Powell Road, so that's where we will be for the next 3 weeks. Then we go to Carter's Bay, our facility out there on Choppy Road, and then finally we end up in Andrews. So there's some great speakers, great topics. Jedrick Bonds is going tomorrow, who's a great friend of the library. And thank you, Carol.
Here's the list of what's going to be the topics at everyone. Feel free to take one.
Much simpler. If brevity is the soul of wit, I'm in trouble. I overtalk things, so much easier, Carol. There's the whole schedule, and the addresses are right there. And we're also filming them and putting them up on the Georgetown County Library YouTube channel afterwards. So if you can't make it in person, you can catch them that way.
An added bonus on that is to see the other libraries. I mean, probably many of you, if not all of you, have been up to Winyall or to Walk'em. But to see the new Southern Library is really a beautiful facility. And then to go to Carver's Bay and to Andrews to be able to see the other libraries. A few years back, Carol and I went around, just did a Saturday visit to all the libraries. It's just a wonderful experience to see all the 5 libraries of the county system. What a great place. Dwight's left. I congratulate him again and appreciate that. Anyway, so pick up copies of that. The book is there, $30. Bud, Billy, thank you. Really special. We appreciate that so very much. And thank you all.